Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I get off the train and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It's a cloudy Thursday afternoon here in suburban Chicago, and my school has just officially gone on coronavirus hiatus. So my classes are still being conducted, but for the near future, I will not be going into campus. We're supposed to practice social distancing with the goal of minimizing the spread of this pandemic. I know I just did an episode about remote gaming, thinking about how this might affect a board game club and thinking about what one would do to make the board game club meet, even in the light of not having meetings. But I thought I might do another episode about it because it's on my mind and I couldn't think of anything else I wanted to do. So I am a little ahead of the curve in terms of timing, so this probably won't come out till next week, but I thought I'd share anyway. So this will be the first of my post-coronavirus hiatus episodes, and I figured a board game, I know I just did a board game sommelier a little while ago, but it seems like another one is in order, and this will be the board game sommelier about pandemics. So it is a time of fear and nervousness and health and danger and society trying to figure out how to do things. So I thought I would talk about 4 sub-themes under the subject of pandemic and share with you some texts you can wrestle with and some games you can play to think about this. Hopefully not in too many terrible ways. So for those of you who haven't listened to a board game sommelier episode before, which I don't imagine I've picked up a lot of listeners in the 3 episodes since I did it last time, but in these episodes I take a subject, in this case pandemic, and I offer a series of pairings of games and other texts that you can consume together in order to explore the topic. So here we go. We'll start with the obvious. Thinking about the idea of a pandemic and trying to comprehend what it could mean. It seems like Pandemic Legacy is the game to choose. Now, Pandemic Legacy is an extreme and perhaps worrying version of this, but fitting nonetheless. If you don't want to wrestle with a game that's going to take that long, you could certainly play the single episode Pandemic, the standard Pandemic board game that would allow you to play through one round of it. But the real experience, the quality experience, is Pandemic Legacy, which allows you to play 12 to 24 games of Pandemic, including an evolving storyline. Now, I would suggest playing it if you're on quarantine like I am. But what would be a nice narrative component with it? Depends on your mental fortitude, I suppose. But I would suggest The Great Influenza. This is a book about the 1918 influenza outbreak. It explores the scientific and cultural ramifications of the event and the things that worked and didn't work in terms of minimizing the effect of the pandemic. It's a bit scary, but I tend to feel like more information is better than less information. So reading that book would be a nice accompaniment. It also has the advantage of being a full book, so you could read a couple chapters, then play a game of Pandemic, then read a couple chapters, and so on. Delightful stuff. Actually terrifying. That's the most obvious pairing to do, is a game about a pandemic and a book about a pandemic. All right, so let's say that we want to find other subjects having to do with pandemic. The first one I'll offer is something about thinking about bunkers. So I read today on Boing Boing that the uber wealthy are retreating to their reinforced safety bunkers. And this is a narrative element that we have in pop culture, the idea of people having built safety bunkers and using them to keep themselves safe from disease. If you were interested in watching films about a safety bunker, feels like I have two to offer. The first one I would offer is, I think it's called 14 Cloverfield Lane. It is the second of the 3 Cloverfield movies, and it involves a character who has built a bunker and uses that bunker to survive the wave of alien attacks that is part of the Cloverfield narrative. There's a lot of stuff that happens in it, but it's mostly about sort of being in that bunker and trying to survive in that bunker. It's an interesting game and well worth a look. In a related, as I think about a game that would accompany this question of the bunker, it feels like, again, getting kind of grim, City of Horror is the game to choose. So City of Horror is a zombie outbreak game in which you and a number of other characters play survivors in a city being overwhelmed by zombies. You have to survive the night, and in the morning you can be rescued. But you can only be rescued if you have one of the vaccines against the zombie bug for each of your characters that's going to be rescued. The trick of the game is that your characters are shuffling around among a couple different buildings with limited room. And the way the game is built, there's more characters than there are space in buildings. And whenever a building is overrun by zombies, one of the characters inside the building has to be thrown out to the zombies. So there's a constant push-pull in which you're trying to decide which characters to sacrifice to help the others survive. And your goal is to have your characters survive while other people's characters are thrown to the zombies. Hopefully nothing like that is happening in our experience of the pandemic, but thinking about the idea of bunkers and safety bunkers, that seems like the game to choose. Boy, this is maybe a grim episode. I did not think this through or think about how grim this would be, but I'm already walking down the path, so there we are. And it's not like you aren't already experiencing this dark scenario. So the third selection I want to offer is one to think about infection. So infection is, of course, a narrative trope that's been used in science fiction films for a long time, particularly with regard to infection by hostile viruses. Now, my first thought was to go with the science fiction narrative of infection via aliens, something like The Thing. And there's an advantage to that, certainly, as a narrative trope. It certainly is about the paranoia of are you infected or not, but it's really more about aliens than about infection. So The Thing didn't seem quite as important to me as other games. So instead, I'm going to offer Panic Station as the example of a game, because in Panic Station, everybody can get infected. The way that game works, when you're moving around and you move into a room, if you encounter someone else, you either have to fight them or exchange a card with them. And if you exchange a card with them, they can infect you. And then you're infected. And the goal is to remain the game uninfected, or if you get infected, infect everyone else. So that's kind of the tension there. And the game runs on this notion of suspicion, of being nervous being around other people. So actually the film I was thinking about that would go well with this is the film Cabin Fever. So Cabin Fever is about an infectious disease that causes people to go on a murderous rampage, but also I think it's a flesh-eating disease, if I recall. And the big part of the film is that you can't tell if you've been infected yet. It feels just like a cold at first. And so as the film goes along, people get more and more suspicious of people who are infected. And the suspicion and jealousy emerges. Well, this has been very unpleasant to record, and I imagine to listen to. So as I think about what is the last pair up that we could offer that might have a bit more positive spin. I'm thinking about maybe something like, now I'm afraid this is a game that I haven't played myself, instead a game I've heard of, Blackout Hong Kong. So Blackout Hong Kong is a 2018 game from Alexander Pfister that was less well received than some of his other games, even though there are many people who find it really, really good. It's a cooperative game about trying to help people make it through Hong Kong during an extended blackout. And you're trying to solve puzzles and keep the game going in a sort of pandemic style, as far as I understand it. Like I said, I'm speaking here from second or third hand information. But as you think about a game about hope, the whole idea of working together to try to solve this problem of the pandemic seems like a good option, even when things are dire. In that regard, I would say the medical thrillers about pandemics, particularly Outbreak and Contagion, both have similar notes of hope, even as things look dire. Contagion in particular has a pretty grim outlook on things, but it does ultimately put faith in people to do the right thing most of the time. And then Outbreak is even more optimistic in that way. Both of these films sort of imagine this working together to make things better aspect of culture that a lot of stories don't connect to. But it seemed like Blackout Hong Kong would be the good one. So finally, the last emotion that I would want to talk about here in the context of a pandemic would be trying to alleviate boredom. That one of the big dangers of the quarantine, the idea of the quarantine, is that we're supposed to minimize social contact, practice social distancing as a way to reduce the likelihood that we get in contact with other people or we spread the virus from one place to the next. And the way that we do that is through isolating ourselves. Now, we board gamers, we've got it made in the shade, right? We have stockpiled activities that will survive even the bandwidth crunch that I expect to see coming any day now, because we have offline fun. Now, if we lose power, that's another story, but I don't see a reason to think things are going to go that far. So that said, what games would we point to as being about fun? For texts, I would say comedic movies. Your hilarious films that you've seen a dozen times but are funny anyway. I suspect Clue will be in order as one potential film we might watch. And then in terms of games, I would say games that have immense replay value. Last night my wife and I were talking about it, and I said, assuming my classes do get canceled and we have to figure out what to do in the long run, at least we'll have plenty of chance to play Gloomhaven. And she said, I was thinking exactly the same thing. So this idea of being able to engage deeply with some of your campaign games or some of your longer games might be one unexpected sort of amusing benefit, even in the face of the likely loneliness and sadness of an extended quarantine. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about with regard to the pandemic. Well, thanks for joining me on my walk today. I appreciate your listenership and hope that you are doing okay in the midst of this outbreak. My best to you and your family, and hope that you're staying safe and playing games and having fun and not worrying too much. Reach out to me at Board Game Geek Guild 3269 or on Board Game Geek. My username is Wombat929. I will be in the house quite a bit for the next 3 weeks, so if you want to play some online games with me, Board Game Arena, my name is Wombat929. I am a professional, or I'm a premium member, so I can start as many games as I like, although it's already slowing to a crawl as they try to handle the massive increase in people being online, so I suspect that will only get worse as more and more people are quarantined and stay home. Here's hoping your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.